A little apart the rangers sat, silent, in an ordered company, armed with spear and bow and sword. They were clad in cloaks of dark gray, and their hoods were cast now over helm and head. Their horses were strong and of proud bearing, but rough-haired, and one stood there without a rider. Aragorn's own horse that they had brought from the north, Roarin was his name. There was no gleam of stone or gold, nor any fair thing in all their gear and harness, nor did their riders bear any badge or token, save only that each cloak was pinned upon the left shoulder by a brooch of silver shaped like a rayed star. The king mounted his horse, Snowmane, and Merry sat beside him on his pony. Stibba was his name. Presently Eomer came out from the gate, and with him was Aragorn, and Halbarad bearing the great staff close-furled in black, and two tall men, neither young nor old. So much alike were they, the sons of Elrond, that few could tell them apart, dark-haired, gray-eyed, and their faces elven fair, clad alike in bright mail beneath cloaks of silver gray. Behind them walked Legolas and Gimli. But Merry had eyes only for Aragorn. So startling was the change that he saw in him, as if in one night many years had fallen on his head. Grim was his face, gray-hued and weary. "I am troubled in mind, Lord," he said, standing by the king's horse. "I have heard strange words, and I see new perils far off. I have labored long in thought, and now I fear that I must change my purpose. Tell me, Theoden, you ride now to Dunharrow. How long will it be ere you come there?" "It is now a full hour past noon," said Eomer. "Before the night of the third day from now, we should come to the hold. The moon will then be 2 nights past his full, and the muster that the king commanded will be held the day after. More speed we cannot make, if the strength of Rohan is to be gathered." Aragorn was silent for a moment. 3 days, he murmured, "and the muster of Rohan will only be begun. But I see that it cannot now be hastened." He looked up, and it seemed that he had made some decision. His face was less troubled. "Then, by your leave, Lord, I must take new counsel for myself and my kindred. We must ride our own road, and no longer in secret. For me the time of stealth has passed. I will ride east by the swiftest way, and I will take the paths of the dead." "The paths of the dead," said Theoden, and trembled. "Why do you speak of them?" Eomer turned and gazed at Aragorn, and it seemed to Merry that the faces of the riders that sat within hearing turned pale at the words. "If there be in truth such paths," said Theoden, "their gate is in Dunharrow, but no living man may pass it." "Alas! Aragorn, my friend," said Eomer, "I had hoped that we should ride to war together. But if you seek the paths of the dead, then our parting is come, and it is little likely that we shall ever meet again under the sun." "That road I will take, none the less," said Aragorn. "But I say to you, Eomer, that in battle we may yet meet again, though all the hosts of Mordor should stand between." "You will do as you will, my lord Aragorn," said Theoden. "It is your doom, maybe, to tread strange paths that others dare not. This parting grieves me, and my strength is lessened by it. But now I must take the mountain roads and delay no longer. Farewell." "Farewell, Lord," said Aragorn. "Ride unto great renown. Farewell, Merry. I leave you in good hands, better than we hoped when we hunted the orcs to Fangorn. Legolas and Gimli will still hunt with me, I hope, but we shall not forget you." "Goodbye," said Merry. He could find no more to say. He felt very small, and he was puzzled and depressed by all these gloomy words. More than ever he missed the unquenchable cheerfulness of Pippin. The riders were ready, and their horses were fidgeting. He wished they would start and get it over. Now Theoden spoke to Eomer, and he lifted up his hand and cried aloud. And with that word the riders set forth. They rode over the dike and down the combe, and then, turning swiftly eastwards, they took a path that skirted the foothills for a mile or so, until bending south it passed back among the hills and disappeared from view. Aragorn rode to the dike and watched till the king's men were far down the combe. Then he turned to Halbarad. "There go 3 that I love, and the smallest not the least," he said. "He knows not to what end he rides. Yet if he knew, he still would go on. A little people, but of great worth, are the Shire folk," said Halbarad. "Little do they know of our long labor for the safe keeping of their borders, and yet I grudge it not. And now our fates are woven together," said Aragorn. "And yet, alas, here we must part. Well, I must eat a little, and then we also must hasten away. Come, Legolas and Gimli, I must speak with you as I eat." Together they went back into the burg. Yet for some time Aragorn sat silent at the table in the hall, and the others waited for him to speak. "Come," said Legolas at last. "Speak and be comforted, and shake off the shadow. What has happened since we came back to this grim place in the gray morning?" "A struggle somewhat grimmer for my part than the battle of the Hornburg," answered Aragorn. "I have looked in the stone of Orthanc, my friends." "You have looked in that accursed stone of wizardry," exclaimed Gimli with fear and astonishment in his face. "Did you say aught to him?" Even Gandalf feared that encounter. "You forget to whom you speak," said Aragorn sternly, and his eyes glinted. "What do you fear that I should say to him? Did I not openly proclaim my title before the doors of Edoras?" "Nay, Gimli," he said in a softer voice, and the grimness left his face, and he looked like one who has labored in sleepless pain for many nights. "Nay, my friends, I am the lawful master of the stone, and I had both the right and the strength to use it, or so I judged. The right cannot be doubted. The strength was enough, barely." He drew a deep breath. "It was a bitter struggle, and the weariness is slow to pass. I spoke no word to him. In the end, I wrenched the stone to my own will. That alone he will find hard to endure. And he beheld me. Yes, Master Gimli, he saw me, but in other guise than you see me here. If that will aid him, then I have done ill. But I do not think so. To know that I lived and walked the earth was a blow to his heart, I deem, for he knew it not till now. The eyes in Orthanc did not see through the armor of Theoden, but Sauron has not forgotten Isildur and the sword of Elendil. Now in the very hour of his great designs the heir of Isildur and the sword are revealed, for I showed the blade reforged to him. He is not so mighty yet that he is above fear, nay, doubt ever gnaws him. But he wields great dominion, none the less, said Gimli, and now he will strike more swiftly. The hasty stroke goes oft astray, said Aragorn. We must press our enemy, and no longer wait upon him for the move. See, my friends, when I had mastered the stone, I learned many things. A grave peril I saw coming unlooked for upon Gondor from the south that will draw off great strength from the defense of Minas Tirith. If it is not countered swiftly, I deem that the city will be lost ere 10 days be gone. Then lost it must be, said Gimli, For what help is there to send thither, and how could it come there in time? I have no help to send, therefore I must go myself, said Aragorn. But there is only one way through the mountains that will bring me to the coastlands before all is lost. That is the paths of the dead. The paths of the dead, said Gimli. It is a fell name, and little to the liking to the men of Rohan, as I saw. Can the living use such a road and not perish? And even if you pass that way, what will so few avail to counter the strokes of Mordor? The living have never used that road since the coming of the Rohirrim, said Aragorn, for it is closed to them. But in this dark hour the heir of Isildur may use it, if he dare. Listen, this is the word that the sons of Elrond bring to me from their father in Rivendell, wisest in lore. Bid Aragorn remember the words of the seer and the paths of the dead. And what may be the words of the seer? Said Legolas. Thus spoke Malbeth the seer in the days of Arvedui, last king of Fernast, said Aragorn. Over the land there lies a long shadow, westward reaching wings of darkness. The tower trembles to the tombs of kings. Doom approaches, the dead awaken, for the hour is come for the oath-breakers. At the stone of Erech they shall stand again, and hear their horn in the hills ringing. Who shall the horn be? Who shall call them? From the gray twilight, the forgotten people, the heir of him to whom the oath they swore. From the north shall he come, need shall drive him. He shall pass the door to the paths of the dead. Dark ways, doubtless, said Gimli, but no darker than these staves are to me. If you would understand them better, then I bid you come with me, said Aragorn, for that way I now shall take. But I do not go gladly, only need drives me. Therefore, only of your free will would I have you come, for you will find both toil and great fear, and maybe worse. I will go with you even on the paths of the dead, and to whatever inn they may lead, said Gimli. I also will come, said Legolas, for I do not fear the dead. I hope that the forgotten people will not have forgotten how to fight, said Gimli, for otherwise I see not why we should trouble them. That we shall know if ever we come to a wreck, said Aragorn. But the oath that they broke was to fight against Sauron, and they must fight therefore, if they are to fulfill it. For at Erech there stands yet a black stone that was brought, it was said, from Numenor by Isildur, and it was set upon a hill, and upon it the king of the mountains swore allegiance to him in the beginning of the realm of Gondor. But when Sauron returned and grew in might again, Isildur summoned the men of the mountains to fulfill their oath, and they would not, for they had worshipped Sauron in the dark years. Then Isildur said to their king, Thou shalt be the last king, and if the west prove mightier than thy black master, this curse I lay upon thee and thy folk, to rest never until your oath is fulfilled. For this war will last through years uncounted, and you shall be summoned once again ere the end. And they fled before the wrath of Isildur, and did not dare to go forth to war on Sauron's part. And they hid themselves in secret places in the mountains, and had no dealings with other men, but slowly dwindled in the barren hills. And the terror of the sleepless dead lies about the hill of Erech and all places where that people lingered. But that way I must go, since there are none living to help me. He stood up. Come, he cried, and drew his sword, and it flashed in the twilight hall of the burg, to the stone of Erech. I seek the paths of the dead. Come with me who will. Legolas and Gimli made no answer, But they rose and followed Aragorn from the hall. On the green there waited, still and silent, the hooded rangers, Legolas and Gimli mounted. Aragorn sprang upon Rohirrim. Then Halbarad lifted a great horn, and the blast of it echoed in Helm's Deep. And with that they leapt away, riding down the combe like thunder, while all the men that were left on dike or burg stared in amaze. And while Theoden went by slow paths in the hills, the grey company passed swiftly over the plain, and on the next day in the afternoon they came to Edoras, and there they halted only briefly, ere they passed up the valley, and so came to Dunharrow as darkness fell. The Lady Yn greeted them, and was glad of their coming, for no mightier men had she seen than the Dunedain and the fair sons of Elrond. But on Aragorn most of all her eyes rested. And when they sat at supper with her, they talked together, and she heard of all that had passed since Theoden rode away, concerning which only hasty tidings had yet reached her. And when she heard of the battle in Helm's Deep and the great slaughter of their foes, and of the charge of Theoden and his knights, then her eyes shone. But at last she said, "Lords, you are weary, and shall now go to your beds with such ease as can be contrived in haste. But tomorrow fairer housing shall be found for you." But Aragorn said, "Nay, lady, be not troubled for us. If we may lie here tonight and break our fast tomorrow, it will be enough. For I ride on an errand most urgent, and with the first light of morning we must go." She smiled on him and said, "Then it was kindly done, Lord, to ride so many miles out of your way to bring tidings to Eowyn and to speak with her in her exile." "Indeed no man would count such a journey wasted," said Aragorn. "And yet, lady, I could not have come hither if it were not that the road which I must take leads me to Dunharrow." And she answered as one that likes not what is said, "Then, Lord, you are astray, for out of Harrowdale no road runs east or south, and you had best return as you came." "Nay, lady," said he, "I am not astray, for I walked in this land ere you were born to grace it. There is a road out of this valley, and that road I shall take. Tomorrow I shall ride by the paths of the dead." Then she stared at him as one that is stricken, and her face blanched, and for long she spoke no more, while all sat silent. "But, Aragorn," she said at last, "is it then your errand to seek death? For that is all that you will find on that road. They do not suffer the living to pass." "They may suffer me to pass," said Aragorn, "but at the least I will adventure it. No other road will serve." "But this is madness," she said, "for here are men of renown and prowess, whom you should not take into the shadows, but should lead to war where men are needed. I beg you to remain and ride with my brother, for then all our hearts will be gladdened, and our hope be the brighter." "It is not madness, lady," he answered, "for I go on a path appointed. But those who follow me do so of their free will, and if they wish now to remain and ride with the Rohirrim, they may do so. But I shall take the paths of the dead, alone, if needs be." Then they said no more, and they ate in silence. But her eyes were ever upon Aragorn, and the others saw that she was in great torment of mind. At length they arose, and took their leave of the lady, and thanked her for her care, and went to their rest. But as Aragorn came to the booth where he was to lodge with Legolas and Gimli, and his companions had gone in, there came the Lady Eowyn after him, and called to him. He turned and saw her as a glimmer in the night, for she was clad in white, but her eyes were on fire. "Aragorn," she said, why will you go on this deadly road?" "Because I must," he said. "Only so can I see any hope of doing my part in the war against Sauron. I do not choose paths of peril. Were I to go where my heart dwells, far in the north, I would now be wandering in the fair valley of Rivendell." For a while she was silent, as if pondering what this might mean. Then suddenly she laid her hand on his arm. "You are a stern lord and resolute," she said, "and thus do men win renown." She paused. "Lord," she said, "if you must go, then let me ride in your following. For I am weary of skulking in the hills, and wish to face peril and battle." "Your duty is with your people," he answered. "Too often have I heard of duty," she cried. "But am I not of the house of Ural, a shield maiden and not a dry nurse? I have waited on faltering feet long enough. Since they falter no longer, it seems, may I not now spend my life as I will?" "Few may do that with honor," he answered. "But as for you, lady, did you not accept the charge to govern the people until their lord's return? If you had not been chosen, then some marshal or captain would have been set in the same place, and he could not ride away from his charge, were he weary of it or no. Shall I always be chosen?" she said bitterly. "Shall I always be left behind when the riders depart, to mind the house while they win renown, and find food and beds when they return? A time may come soon," said he, "when none will return. Then there will be need of valor without renown, for none shall remember the deeds that are done in the last defense of your homes. Yet the deeds will not be less valiant, because they are unpraised." And she answered, "All your words are but to say, you are a woman, and your part is in the house. But when the men have died in battle and honor, you have leave to be burned in the house, for the men will need it no more. But I am of the house of Ural, and not a serving woman. I can ride and wield blade, and I do not fear either pain or death." "What do you fear, lady?" he asked. "A cage," she said, "to stay behind bars, until use and old age accept them, and all chance of doing great deeds is gone beyond recall or desire. And yet you counseled me not to adventure on the road that I had chosen, because it is perilous? So may one counsel another," she said. "Yet I do not bid you flee from peril, but to ride to battle where your sword may win renown and victory. I would not see a thing that is high and excellent cast away needlessly." "Nor would I," he said. "Therefore I say to you, lady, stay, for you have no errand to the south, neither have those others who go with thee. They go only because they would not be parted from thee, because they love thee." Then she turned and vanished into the night. When the light of day was come into the sky, but the sun was not yet risen above the high ridges in the east, Aragorn made ready to depart. His company was all mounted, and he was about to leap into the saddle, when the lady Eowyn came to bid them farewell. She was clad as a rider and girt with a sword. In her hand she bore a cup, and she set it to her lips and drank a little, wishing them good speed. And then she gave the cup to Aragorn, and he drank, and he said, "Farewell, Lady of Rohan. I drink to the fortunes of your house, and of you, and of all your people. Say to your brother, beyond the shadows we may meet again." Then it seemed to Gimli and Legolas, who were nearby, that she wept, and in one so stern and proud that seemed the more grievous. But she said, "Aragorn, wilt thou go?" "I will," he said. "Then wilt thou not let me ride with this company, as I have asked?" "I will not, lady," he said, for that I could not grant without leave of the king and of your brother, and they will not return until tomorrow. But I count now every hour, indeed every minute. Farewell." Then she fell on her knees, saying, "I beg thee." "Nay, lady," he said, and taking her by the hand he raised her. Then he kissed her hand, and sprang into the saddle, and rode away, and did not look back. And only those who knew him well and were near to him saw the pain that he bore. But Eowyn stood still as a figure carven in stone, her hands clenched at her sides, and she watched them until they passed into the shadows under the black Dwimorberg, the haunted mountain, in which was the door of the dead. When they were lost to view, she turned, stumbling as one that is blind, and went back to her lodging. But none of her folk saw this parting, for they hid themselves in fear and would not come forth until the day was up and the reckless strangers were gone. And some said, "They are elvish wights. Let them go where they belong, into the dark places, and never return. The times are evil enough." The light was still gray as they rode, for the sun had not yet climbed over the black ridges of the haunted mountain before them. A dread fell on them, even as they passed between the lines of ancient stones, and so came to the dim hold. There, under the gloom of black trees that not even Legolas could long endure, they found a hollow place opening at the mountain's root, and right in their path stood a single mighty stone like a finger of doom. "My blood runs chill," said Gimli, but the others were silent, and his voice fell dead on the dank fir needles at his feet. The horses would not pass the threatening stone until the riders dismounted and led them about. And so they came at last deep into the glen, and there stood a sheer wall of rock, and in the wall the dark door gaped before them like the mouth of night. Signs and figures were carved above its wide arch too dim to read, and fear flowed from it like a gray vapor. The company halted, and there was not a heart among them that did not quail, unless it were the heart of Legolas of the elves, for whom the ghosts of men have no terror. "This is an evil door," said Halbarad, "and my death lies beyond it. I will dare to pass it nonetheless, but no horse will enter. But we must go in, and therefore the horses must go too," said Aragorn. "For if ever we come through this darkness, many leagues lie beyond, and every hour that is lost there will bring the triumph of Sauron nearer. Follow me." Then Aragorn led the way, and such was the strength of his will in that hour that all the Dunedain and their horses followed him. And indeed the love that the horses of the rangers bore for their riders was so great that they were willing to face even the terror of the door, if their masters' hearts were steady as they walked beside them. But Arad, the horse of Rohan, refused the way, and he stood sweating and trembling in a fear that was grievous to see. Then Legolas laid his hands on his eyes and sang some words that went soft in the gloom, until he suffered himself to be led, and Legolas passed in. And there stood Gimli the dwarf left all alone. His knees shook, and he was wroth with himself. "Here is a thing unheard of," he said. "An elf will go underground, and a dwarf dare not." With that he plunged in. But it seemed to him that he dragged his feet like lead over the threshold, and at once a blindness came upon him, even upon Gimli Gloin's son, who had walked unafraid in many deep places of the world. Aragorn had brought torches from Dunharrow, and now he went ahead bearing one aloft, and Elladan with another one at the rear, and Gimli, stumbling behind, strove to overtake him. He could see nothing but the dim flame of the torches. But if the company halted, there seemed an endless whisper of voices all about him, a murmur of words in no tongue that he had ever heard before. Nothing assailed the company, nor withstood their passage, and yet steadily fear grew on the dwarf as he went on. Most of all because he knew now that there could be no turning back. All the paths behind were thronged by an unseen host that followed in the dark. So time unreckoned passed, until Gimli saw a sight that he was ever afterwards loath to recall. The road was wide, as far as he could judge, but now the company came suddenly into a great empty space, and there were no longer any walls upon either side. The dread was so heavy on him that he could hardly walk. Away to the left something glittered in the gloom as Aragorn's torch drew near. Then Aragorn halted and went to look what it might be. "Does he feel no fear?" muttered the dwarf. In any other cave, Gimli Gloinson would have been the first to run to the gleam of gold. But not here. Let it lie. None the less he drew near, and saw Aragorn kneeling, while Elladan held aloft both torches. Before him were the bones of a mighty man. He had been clad in mail, and still his harness lay there whole, for the cavern's air was as dry as dust, and his hauberk was gilded. His belt was of gold and garnets, and rich with gold was the helm upon his bony head, face downward on the floor. He had fallen near the far wall of the cave, as now could be seen, and before him stood a stony door closed fast. His finger bones were still clawing at the cracks. A notched and broken sword lay by him, as if he had hewn at the rock in his last despair. Aragorn did not touch him, but after gazing silently for a while he rose and sighed. "Hither shall the flowers of Cymbeline come never unto world's end," he murmured. "9 mounds and 7 there are now green with grass, and through all the long years he has lain at the door that he could not unlock. Whither does it lead? Why would he pass? None shall ever know. For that is not my errand," he cried, turning back and speaking to the whispering darkness behind. "Keep your hoards and your secrets hidden in the accursed years. Speed only we ask. Let us pass and then come. I summon you to the stone of Erech." There was no answer, unless it were an utter silence more dreadful than the whispers before. And then a chill blast came in which the torches flickered and went out, and could not be rekindled. Of the time that followed, 1 hour or many, Gimli remembered little. The others pressed on, but he was ever hindmost, pursued by a groping horror that seemed always just about to seize him. And a rumor came after him like the shadow sound of many feet. He stumbled on until he was crawling like a beast on the ground, and felt that he could endure no more. He must either find an ending and escape, or run back in madness to meet the following fear. Suddenly he heard the tinkle of water, a sound hard and clear as a stone falling into a dream of dark shadow. Light grew and lo, the company passed through another gateway, high-arched and broad, and a rill ran out beside them, and beyond, going steeply down, was a road between sheer cliffs, knife-edged against the sky far above. So deep and narrow was that chasm that the sky was dark, and in it small stars glinted. Yet, as Gimli after learned, it was still 2 hours ere sunset of the day on which they had set out from Dunharrow, though for all that he could then tell it might have been twilight in some later year, or in some other world. The company now mounted again, and Gimli returned to Legolas. They rode in file, and evening came on in a deep blue dusk, and still fear pursued them. Legolas, turning to speak to Gimli, looked back, and the dwarf saw before his face the glitter in the elf's bright eyes. Behind them rode Elladan, last of the company, but not the last of those that took the downward road. "The dead are following," said Legolas. "I see shapes of men and of horses, and pale banners like shreds of cloud, and spears like winter thickets on a misty night. The dead are following. Yes, the dead ride behind. They have been summoned," said Elladan. The company came at last out of the ravine, as suddenly as if they had issued from a crack in a wall, and there lay the uplands of a great vale before them, and the stream beside them went down with a cold voice over many falls. "Where in Middle-earth are we?" said Gimli, and Elladan answered, "We have descended from the uprising of the Morthond, the long chill river that flows at last to the sea that washes the walls of Dol Amroth. You will not need to ask hereafter how comes its name. Blackroot men call it. The Morthond Vale made a great bay that beat up against the sheer southern faces of the mountains. Its steep slopes were grass-grown, but all was gray in that hour, for the sun had gone, and far below lights twinkled in the homes of men. The vale was rich, and many folk dwelt there. Then, without turning, Aragorn cried aloud, so that all could hear, 'Friends, forget your weariness. Ride now, ride. We must come to the stone of a wreck ere this day passes, and long still is the way.' So without looking back they rode the mountain fields, until they came to a bridge over the growing torrent, and found a road that went down into the land. Lights went out in house and hamlet as they came, and doors were shut, and folk that were afield cried in terror and ran wild like hunted deer. Ever there rose the same cry in the gathering night, 'The King of the Dead! The King of the Dead is come upon us!' Bells were ringing far below, and all men fled before the face of Aragorn. But the great company in their haste rode like hunters, until their horses were stumbling with weariness. And thus, just ere midnight, and in a darkness as black as the caverns in the mountains, they came at last to the hill of a wreck. Long had the terror of the dead lain upon that hill, and upon the empty fields about it. For upon the top stood a black stone, round as a great globe, the height of a man, though its half was buried in the ground. Unearthly it looked, as though it had fallen from the sky, as some believed, but those who remembered still the lore of Westenaes told that it had been brought out of the ruin of Numenor, and there set by Isildur at his landing. None of the people of the valley dared to approach it, nor would they dwell near, for they said that it was a trysting place of the shadow men, and there they would gather in times of fear, thronging round the stone and whispering. To that stone the company came and halted in the dead of night. Then Elrohir gave to Aragorn a silver horn, and he blew upon it. And it seemed to those that stood near that they heard a sound of answering horns, as if it was an echo in deep caves far away. No other sound they heard, and yet they were aware of a great host gathered all about the hill on which they stood, and a chill wind like the breath of ghosts came down from the mountains. But Aragorn dismounted, and standing by the stone he cried in a great voice, "Oath-breakers, why have ye come?" And a voice was heard out of the night that answered him, as if from far away, "To fulfill our oath and have peace." Then Aragorn said, "The hour is come at last. Now I go to Pelargir upon Anduin, and ye shall come after me. And when all this land is clean of the servants of Sauron, I will hold the oath fulfilled, and ye shall have peace and depart forever. For I am Elisar, Isildur's heir of Gundor. And with that he bade Halbarad unfurl the great standard which he had brought, and behold, it was black, and if there was any device upon it, it was hidden in the darkness. Then there was silence, and not a whisper nor a sigh was heard again all the long night. The company camped beside the stone, but they slept little because of the dread of the shadows that hedged them round. But when the dawn came, cold and pale, Aragorn rose at once, and he led the company forth upon the journey of greatest haste and weariness that any among them had known, save he alone, and only his will held them to go on. No other mortal men could have endured it, none but the Dunedain of the north, and with them Gimli the dwarf and Legolas of the elves. They passed Tarlang's neck and came into Lamidon, and the shadow host pressed behind, and fear went on before them, until they came to Calimbel upon Cyril, and the sun went down like blood behind Pinnith Gellan away in the west behind them. The township and the fords of Cyril they found deserted, for many men had gone away to war, and all that were left fled to the hills at the rumor of the coming of the king of the dead. But the next day there came no dawn, and the gray company passed on into the darkness of the storm of Mordor, and were lost to mortal sight. But the dead followed them. Chapter 3. The Muster of Rohan. Now all roads were running together to the east to meet the coming of war and the onset of the shadow. And even as Pippin stood at the great gate of the city and saw the prince of Dol Amroth ride in with his banners, the king of Rohan came down out of the hills. Day was waning. In the last rays of the sun, the riders cast long pointed shadows that went on before them. Darkness had already crept beneath the murmuring fir woods that clothed the steep mountainsides. The king rode, now slowly at the end of the day. Presently the path turned round a huge bare shoulder of rock and plunged into the gloom of soft-sighing trees. Down they went in a long, winding file. When at last they came to the bottom of the gorge, they found that evening had fallen in the deep places. The sun was gone. Twilight lay upon the waterfalls. All day far below them a leaping stream had run down from the high pass behind, cleaving its narrow way between pine-clad walls. And now through a stony gate it flowed out and passed into a wider vale. The riders followed it, and suddenly Harrowdale lay before them, loud with the noise of waters in the evening. There the white Snowborn, joined by the lesser stream, went rushing, fuming on the stones, down to Adoras and the green hills and the plains. Away to the right at the head of the great dale the mighty Starkhorn loomed up above its vast buttresses swathed in cloud, but its jagged peak, clothed in everlasting snow, gleamed far above the world, blue-shadowed upon the east, red-stained by the sunset in the west. Merry looked out in wonder upon this strange country, of which he had heard many tales upon their long road. It was a skyless world, in which his eye, through dim gulfs of shadowy air, saw only ever-mounting slopes, great walls of stone behind great walls, and frowning precipices wreathed with mist. He sat for a moment half dreaming, listening to the noise of water, the whisper of dark trees, the crack of stone, and the vast waiting silence that brooded behind all sound. He loved mountains, or he had loved the thought of them marching on the edge of stories brought from far away. But now he was borne down by the insupportable weight of Middle-earth. He longed to shut out the immensity in a quiet room by a fire. He was very tired, for though they had ridden slowly, They had ridden with very little rest. Hour after hour for nearly 3 weary days he had jogged up and down, over passes and through long dales and across many streams. Sometimes where the way was broader he had ridden at the king's side, not noticing that many of the riders smiled to see the two together, the hobbit on his little shaggy gray pony, and the Lord of Rohan on his great white horse. Then he had talked to Theoden, telling him about his home and the doings of the Shire folk, or listening in turn to tales of the Mark and its mighty men of old. But most of the time, especially on this last day, Merry had ridden by himself just behind the king, saying nothing and trying to understand the slow, sonorous speech of Rohan that he heard the men behind him using. It was a language in which there seemed to be many words that he knew, though spoken more richly and strongly than in the Shire, yet he could not piece the words together. At times some rider would lift up his clear voice in stirring song, and Merry felt his heart leap, though he did not know what it was about. All the same, he had been lonely, and never more so than now at the day's end. He wondered where in all this strange world Pippin had got to, and what would become of Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli. Then suddenly, like a cold touch on his heart, he thought of Frodo and Sam. "I am forgetting them," he said to himself reproachfully, "and yet they are more important than all the rest of us. And I came to help them, but now they must be hundreds of miles away if they are still alive." He shivered. "Harrowdale at last," said Eomer. "Our journey is almost an end." They halted. The paths out of the narrow gorge fell steeply. Only a glimpse, as through a tall window, could be seen of the great valley in the gloaming below. A single small light could be seen twinkling by the river. "This journey is over, maybe," said Theoden, "but I have far yet to go. 2 nights ago the moon was full, and in the morning I shall ride to Edora's to the gathering of the Mark." "But if you would take my counsel," said Eomer in a low voice, "you would then return hither until the war is over, lost or won." Theoden smiled. "Nay, my son, for so I will call you. Speak not the soft words of Wormtongue in my old ears." He drew himself up and looked back at the long line of his men fading into the dust behind. "Long years in the space of days it seems since I rode west, but never will I lean on a staff again. If the war is lost, what good will be my hiding in the hills? And if it is won, what grief will it be, even if I fall, spending my last strength? But we will leave this now. Tonight I will lie in the hold of Dunharrow. One evening of peace at least is left us. Let's ride on." In the deepening dusk they came down into the valley. Here the Snowbourn flowed near to the western walls of the dale, and soon the path led them to a ford where the shallow waters murmured loudly on the stones. The ford was guarded. As the king approached, many men sprang up out of the shadow of the rocks, and when they saw the king they cried with glad voices, "Theoden King! Theoden King! The king of the Mark returns." Then one blew a long call on a horn. It echoed in the valley. Other horns answered it, and lights shone out across the river. And suddenly there rose a great chorus of trumpets from high above, sounding from some hollow place, as it seemed, that gathered their notes into one voice and sent it rolling and beating on the walls of stone. So the king of the Mark came back victorious out of the west to Dunharrow beneath the feet of the White Mountains. There he found the remaining strength of his people already assembled, for as soon as his coming was known, captains rode to meet him at the ford, bearing messages from Gandalf. Dunher, chieftain of the folk of Harrowdale, was at their head. At dawn 3 days ago, Lord, he said, Shadowfax came like a wind out of the west to Edoras, and Gandalf brought tidings of your victory to gladden our hearts. But he brought also word from you to hasten the gathering of the riders. And then came the winged shadow. The winged shadow, said Theoden. We saw it also, but that was in the dead of night before Gandalf left us. Maybe, Lord, said Dunhere, yet the same, or another like to it. A flying darkness in the shape of a monstrous bird passed over Edoras that morning, and all men were shaken with fear. For it stooped upon Meduseld, and as it came low, almost to the gable, there came a cry that stopped our hearts. Then it was that Gandalf counseled us not to assemble in the fields, but to meet you here in the valley under the mountains. And he bade us to kindle no more lights or fires than barest need asked. So it has been done. Gandalf spoke with great authority. We trust that it is as you would wish. Naught has been seen in Harrowdale of these evil things. It is well, said Theoden. I will ride now to the hold, and there before I go to rest I will meet the marshals and captains. Let them come to me as soon as may be. The road now led eastward straight across the valley, which was at that point little more than half a mile in width. Flats and meads of rough grass, gray now in the falling night, lay all about, but in front on the far side of the dale Merry saw a frowning wall, a last outlier of the great roots of the Starcorn, cloven by the river in ages past. On all the level spaces there was great concourse of men, some